Chapter 5 is all about challenge. This is the point in the book when we start encouraging teachers to think about planning the actual lesson. And we start by talking about a story of a teacher that we'd worked with about 3 or 4 years ago who'd got an addiction to what he described as GLAs. Now, initially we were confused by what he meant by that, but he went into more detail. He said, Mark, I've realised by working with you guys that I've become addicted to GLAs, or as he described them, good little activities. He said, when I was planning my lessons, I'd look at my lesson and I'd say, oh, that looks a bit boring. I'll sprinkle a few GLAs on top of it. And what the teacher had learned through the process was he'd fallen into the trap of becoming activity driven. He'd say something great on the TES website or on Twitter and he'd say, I'll use that in the lesson. But actually, he wasn't teaching backwards. And at this stage in the process, teachers should be choosing challenges that generate the proof that learners are moving or have reached that destination. If we choose the wrong activity, we as teachers might fool ourselves those children have achieved that destination when they really haven't. So we talk in the chapter a lot about why. Because some teachers have it in their mind, my job is to make learning easy for children so they can grasp it, so they can move on to the next steps. Now, we completely disagree, and our thinking is backed up by a lot of research that exists out there today. First of all, the cognitive research from people like Daniel Willingham, who talks about memory being the residue of thought. We're in the memory game as teachers, and unless we create opportunities and lessons for children to think deeply about what they're being taught, they won't remember it at a later date. And ultimately, you might come back to this content 6 months' time and try and build upon it. And if those children have forgotten the basics, the foundations, then they'll be struggling. The second element is this. John Hattie's research shows that the most effective teachers are those who create the highest challenge in lessons. Why? Because challenge in lessons provides the teacher with opportunities to get more accurate feedback about what students know and their gaps in their learning. If the challenge isn't there, and for example, children aren't challenged to apply new learning to a different setting, the teacher might be kidding themselves that children have closed that gap and developed new learning when they actually haven't. And thirdly and finally, and we talk about this in our first book, Engaging Learners, without challenge there isn't flow. And from the early years classroom up to year 13 A-level students, when you see a class in flow, it's because the teacher has created appropriate levels of challenge. The rest of this chapter, we talk about different examples of how we might do it. But we encourage teachers to think carefully about which activity they choose. We don't want to fall into the trap of the GLA-addicted teacher. Instead, we ask teachers to think about what knowledge and skills do we want our learners to have developed, and then choose an appropriate activity that develops that knowledge, that understanding, or those skills that prove they've achieved that destination.